Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The overhead lights in Milton Frank's garage cast sharp shadows as he wiped grease from his hands, the smell of motor oil hanging thick in the November air. At 36, he'd built a comfortable life restoring classic cars, a one-man operation that kept him busy without drowning him in stress. The 1967 Mustang on the lift above him represented 3 months of work, and he was close to finishing. His phone buzzed. Judy's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, babe," he answered, tucking the phone against his shoulder. "Andrea's engagement party is next Saturday." His wife's voice carried that particular tone he'd learned meant this wasn't optional. "My parents want the whole family there. Ryan, too." Milton set down his wrench. "Your dad specifically asked for Ryan?" "He said it would mean a lot to Andrea. You know how close she and Ryan are." Close wasn't the word Milton would have used. Andrea Bishop, Judy's younger sister by 8 years, had always seemed awkward around Ryan, their 10-year-old son. She'd send expensive gifts on birthdays, video games rated too mature for his age, designer clothes Ryan never wore, but rarely visited. The last family dinner at George and Marion Bishop's estate in the hills had been 6 months ago, and Andrea had spent most of it on her phone. "Who's she marrying again?" Milton asked. "Cameron Snell. You met him once, remember? Works in real estate development with Dad." Milton had a vague memory of a man in his 40s with perfect teeth and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. "Right? When does it start?" 6 o'clock. Cocktail attire. Judy paused. "Dad said to bring Ryan by 5:30. He wants to show him something in his study before the party starts." Every instinct Milton had developed over 16 years of marriage told him something was off. George Bishop had never shown individual interest in Ryan. The man barely acknowledged his grandson beyond obligatory holiday checks and awkward pats on the head. "What does he want to show him?" "I don't know. Does it matter? Ryan loves Grandpa." The defensiveness in Judy's voice was automatic, the same wall she'd throw up whenever Milton questioned her family. Milton had met Judy Bishop when they were both 20. She'd been working at her father's real estate office that summer, and Milton had been contracted to restore the vintage Corvette George kept in his private collection. Judy was beautiful, sharp-witted, and drawn to Milton's quiet competence. They'd married within a year, much to George's barely concealed disappointment. George Bishop had built his fortune in real estate development, transforming cheap land into profitable subdivisions. His sprawling estate sat on 15 acres outside Richmond, Virginia, a monument to wealth that made Milton's modest 3-bedroom house feel like a tool shed. George had made it clear from the start that he'd expected Judy to marry someone from their circle, a lawyer, a banker, someone who wore suits and played golf at the country club. "Fine," Milton said. "We'll be there." After he hung up, Milton stood in the silence of his garage, staring at the Mustang's chrome bumper. Dean Peck, his neighbor 2 doors down, had mentioned something odd last week over the fence. Dean was a city cop with 18 years on the force, currently assigned to vice and organized crime. They'd become friends over the past 5 years, bonding over weekend barbecues and shared custody schedules. Dean's daughter visited every other weekend. "Your father-in-law's name came up in a case file," Dean had said, keeping his voice low even though they were alone. "Probably nothing. Rich guys get tangled in all sorts of business disputes." "What kind of case?" Milton had asked. Dean had just shaken his head. "Can't talk about active investigations. Just keep your eyes open." Now Milton wondered if he should have pressed harder. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of November day that felt borrowed from October. Ryan bounced in the back seat of their Honda, dressed in the button-down shirt and slacks Judy had laid out. At 10, he still had that boundless energy that made sitting still a foreign concept. "Do I have to stay the whole time?" Ryan asked. "Just for a couple hours," Milton said, meeting his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Then we can get burgers on the way home." Judy sat in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. She'd worn the navy dress George had sent her last Christmas, the one that probably cost more than Milton made in a month. "Be nice to Cameron," she said. "Andrea's really happy." "I'm always nice," Milton replied. "You have a face. Everyone has a face. You know what I mean. That look you get when you don't trust someone." Milton didn't respond. He learned that sometimes silence worked better than arguing. The Bishop estate came into view as they wound up the private road, flanked by old oaks that George had paid a fortune to preserve during construction. The main house was a colonial revival with columns that belonged in a movie about Southern aristocracy. Cars already lined the circular drive, BMWs, Mercedes, a Bentley that belonged to Dennis Fitch, one of George's business partners. George himself stood at the front entrance, greeting guests with the rehearsed warmth of a politician. At 63, he maintained the appearance of someone 20 years younger through careful diet, expensive hair treatments, and what Judy insisted was just good genetics. His smile widened when he saw Ryan. "There's my grandson." George's voice boomed across the drive. "Come here, son. I've got something special to show you." Ryan looked to Milton, who nodded. The boy climbed out and ran to his grandfather, who wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Judy, you look beautiful," George said, kissing his daughter's cheek. Then to Milton, "Good to see you. Help yourself to drinks." Bars set up on the terrace. "Dad wanted to show Ryan something in his study," Judy reminded him. Of course. George kept his hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Won't take long. Milton, why don't you come too? You might appreciate this." They entered the house through the grand foyer, where Marion Bishop was directing caterers with the precision of a general deploying troops. She gave Judy a quick hug and Milton a polite nod before returning to her clipboard. George's study occupied the entire east wing of the first floor. Milton had been inside once before, years ago, and remembered the oppressive wealth of it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that probably had never been read, a desk the size of a pool table, and hunting trophies from safaris that George claimed built character. "Wait here a moment," George said, guiding them to a sitting area near the window. "I need to grab something from upstairs. Ryan, you're going to love this." As George disappeared through a side door, Milton scanned the room. The desk was covered with papers, a laptop open but angled away. Several framed photographs lined the credenza behind it. George shaking hands with governors, posing with business partners, standing beside Andrea at her college graduation. Ryan had already wandered to the bookshelves, pulling out a volume about Civil War battles. Milton moved toward the desk, drawn by the same instinct that made him check under the hood when a car sounded off. The laptop screen showed an email chain. Milton couldn't read it from where he stood without being obvious, but he could see the subject line, "Intake Schedule, November." Papers were scattered across the desk surface. Legal documents, it looked like, with letterhead from a firm Milton didn't recognize. One had slipped partially out of a folder, revealing a heading that made his stomach drop. Petition for emergency custody. He leaned closer, pretending to examine one of the photographs while his eyes tracked across the visible text. Names, ages, addresses. Children's names. One document had a photograph paper clipped to it. A boy about Ryan's age, smiling in a school photo. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Milton stepped back quickly, turned to find Dean Peck standing in the study doorway. His neighbor wore civilian clothes, a polo shirt and khakis, but his expression carried the weight of his badge. Dean's eyes went from Milton to Ryan to the desk, and something hardened in his face. "Milton," Dean said quietly, "get your son. We're leaving. Now." "What?" "Don't argue. Don't make a scene. Get Ryan and walk with me to my car." Dean's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but the command in it was absolute. Ryan looked up from his book, confused. Milton's heart hammered, but he kept his voice calm. "Come on, bud. We need to go." "But Grandpa." "Now, Ryan." The firmness in Milton's tone cut through Ryan's protest. The boy set down the book and crossed to his father, who took his hand. Dean stepped aside, gesturing them toward a back hallway that led to the side entrance. They walked quickly, not quite running. Milton could hear voices from the terrace. The party was starting, guests arriving in clusters. Dean led them around the side of the house, keeping to the shadows of the hedges, until they reached the driveway where Dean's Charger sat 3 cars down from where Milton had parked. "Get in," Dean said, unlocking the doors. Milton helped Ryan into the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. Dean started the engine and pulled out smoothly, not rushing, not drawing attention. As they turned onto the main road, Milton saw George emerge from the house, scanning the driveway with a phone pressed to his ear. For 20 minutes, Dean drove in silence. Ryan had fallen quiet in the back seat, sensing the tension. They headed east, away from the Bishop estate, away from Milton's neighborhood, until Dean pulled into a rest stop off Route 60 and parked at the far end of the lot. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Then he turned to Milton. "You really didn't see what was on your father-in-law's desk?" "I saw custody papers. Children's names." Milton's throat felt tight. "Dean, what the hell is going on?" Dean pulled out his phone, scrolled through some photos, then handed it to Milton. The screen showed a document, a report from Child Protective Services with George Bishop's signature as a certified foster care provider and legal guardian. "Your father-in-law isn't just a real estate developer," Dean said. "He's been running a pipeline for the last 8 years. He and at least 4 other men identify vulnerable kids, usually from middle-class families with some kind of instability. Divorce, financial problems, one parent with a record. Then they manufacture reasons to get CPS involved. False reports, planted evidence, paid witnesses. Once the kids are in the system, George steps in as the concerned community member willing to provide foster care." Milton felt ice spreading through his chest. And then they disappear into his network. Some get sent to work in illegal operations overseas. Some get sold to adoption rings that don't ask questions. Dean's jaw clenched. Some were still trying to find. "Ryan," Milton whispered. "Why Ryan? Your wife filed for divorce 6 months ago. Did you know that?" The words hit Milton like a physical blow. "What? She never went through with it." The papers were filed with a lawyer named Kevin Becker. He's one of George's partners. The petition cited emotional abuse, instability, potential danger to the child. All lies, I'm guessing, but enough to build a case. Enough to make Ryan look like a kid in need of intervention. Milton's mind reeled. 6 months ago, Judy had been distant that spring, spending more time at her parents' house, but she blamed it on stress from Andrea's drama. He'd never suspected. "The engagement party," Milton said slowly. "That wasn't the real reason they wanted Ryan there." "No," Dean confirmed. "There's a judge at that party, Mitchell Noble. He's been on George's payroll for years, rubber stamping emergency custody orders. My guess is they plan to have CPS show up with police escort, remove Ryan from your home tonight, citing immediate danger, and place him with George as emergency guardian. By Monday morning, you'd be fighting a rigged system with a judge who's already decided against you." Ryan's voice came from the back seat, small and scared. "Dad!" Milton turned, reaching back to squeeze his son's knee. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe." But Ryan wasn't safe. None of them were. Not while George Bishop had power, money, and a network of people willing to destroy families for profit. Dean was watching Milton carefully. "I can protect you for tonight. Get you somewhere safe. But this investigation has been going on for 14 months, and we're still months away from having enough evidence to move. These men are careful. They have lawyers, judges, politicians in their pocket. If we move too fast, they'll slip away," Milton finished. "And keep doing this to other families." "Yes." Milton looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Ryan's eyes were wide, frightened but trusting. His boy, his responsibility, the thing Milton Frank loved most in this world. Then he thought about the photograph on George's desk, the smiling child whose face he'd glimpsed for only a second. How many others were there? How many families had George Bishop destroyed? "Tell me everything," Milton said to Dean. "Every single thing you know about how they operate." Dean studied him. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Milton said quietly, "that if you need months to build a case, you're doing it the legal way. And the legal way is what these men count on." He met Dean's eyes. "I'm going to do it my way." The safe house was a cabin 40 miles west of Richmond, owned by Dean's uncle who spent winters in Florida. 3 bedrooms, well water, and enough isolation that nobody would stumble across them by accident. Dean made 2 calls, one to his sergeant, claiming a family emergency, and one to a friend in the department who owed him favors. Ryan fell asleep on the couch within an hour, exhausted by adrenaline and confusion. Milton covered him with a blanket and joined Dean at the kitchen table, where his neighbor had spread out copies of case files, surveillance photos, and handwritten notes that represented more than a year of careful investigation. There are 5 core members, Dean explained, pointing to photographs. George Bishop is the money in the front. He's got connections, respectability, and the foster care license. Kevin Becker is the lawyer who handles all the legal manipulation, false CPS reports, custody filings, restraining orders. Dennis Fitch runs the logistics, transportation, documentation, offshore accounts. Cameron Snell handles real estate, properties where they hide kids temporarily before moving them. And Mitchell Noble is the judge who makes it all legal. Andrea's fiancé, Milton said, staring at Cameron Snell's photo. The man's perfect smile now looked predatory. Yeah, that's probably not a coincidence. George likes to keep things in the family. Milton studied the surveillance photos. George meeting with Becker at a restaurant. Fitch loading children into a van at night. Snell showing a property to someone whose face was blurred, but whose body language screamed discomfort. How many kids? Milton asked. That we know of? 32 over 8 years. But we only found documentation for 17. The others? Dean didn't finish. Milton's hands clenched into fists. And you can't arrest them because we need evidence that'll stick in federal court. These aren't street criminals. They've got resources for legal battles that'll last years. If we arrest them on what we have now, their lawyers will get them out in 48 hours, and they'll disappear. We need financial records, communications, testimonies from multiple witnesses. We need airtight. While more kids disappear. Dean agreed quietly. It's eating me alive, Milton. Every day I know what they're doing, and I can't stop them. Milton leaned back in his chair, mind working through possibilities. He'd spent 16 years building cars, solving mechanical problems by understanding systems and finding pressure points. This was a system too, just made of people instead of pistons and gears. Tell me about their process, he said. Step by step. How do they choose targets? Dean pulled out a notebook. They look for families with certain markers. Usually middle class, not poor enough to already be on CPS radar, but not wealthy enough to fight a prolonged legal battle. There's always some element of instability, recent divorce, job loss, minor legal troubles. Something that makes the parents vulnerable. Like Judy filing for divorce. Exactly. They watch families, sometimes for months. They collect information, build profiles. Then they create a crisis. Maybe a teacher calls and a false report of bruising. Maybe a neighbor claims they heard screaming. CPS has to investigate every report, even anonymous ones. Once that file is open, Becker uses his connections to plant more evidence. Suddenly the parent looks dangerous, unstable. The child needs immediate intervention. And George steps in as the savior. The respected community member willing to provide temporary foster care. Judge Noble signs the emergency order. The kid is removed, usually within 24 hours. By the time the parents can mount a defense, the child is already in George's custody. And then, Dean's expression darkened. Then the child is reassessed by doctors on George's payroll. They find signs of deeper trauma, recommend longer-term placement. The legal battles drag on. Most parents give up, broken by the system. And even if they win eventually, it's too late. The kid is already gone. Milton absorbed this, feeling rage build like pressure in a sealed engine. Where do they take them? We think there's a central location, maybe one of Snell's properties, where they hold kids for processing. Then they're moved through a network. Some go overseas, some to domestic adoption rings, some to labor operations. We've tracked some movement through offshore accounts, but the actual locations. Dean shook his head. That's what we're missing. Without knowing where they take the kids, we can't make rescues. What about the kids you've documented? Can any of them testify? Most are gone. The few we found. Dean's voice caught. They're too traumatized. They've been trained to trust no one, to see police as the enemy. It would take months of therapy before they could even consider testifying, and their testimonies alone wouldn't be enough. The defense would tear them apart. Milton stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark woods. The enormity of it pressed down on him. The calculated cruelty, the system weaponized against the innocent. Men who should protect children instead preyed on them. And they'd built their operation so carefully that even a good cop like Dean couldn't touch them. But Dean was bound by rules, by procedure, by the need for evidence that would satisfy courts and lawyers. Milton wasn't. I need to see where they operate, Milton said. The properties, the offices, the places they meet. Milton, I'm not asking you to help me do anything illegal. I just need information. Addresses, schedules, patterns. You've been watching them for 14 months. You know their routines. Dean stood, crossing to face Milton directly. What are you planning? I'm planning to give you evidence that'll stick. But I'm going to do it my way. If you get caught, I won't. Milton met his friend's eyes. These men threaten my son. They've destroyed dozens of families. And they think they're untouchable because they've rigged the game. A cold smile touched his lips. But they've never played against someone who doesn't follow their rules. Dean studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolling through files. There's a property in Henrico County. Warehouse registered to one of Snell's shell companies. We've seen vehicles coming and going at odd hours, but we haven't been able to get close enough to confirm what's inside. If you wanted to find evidence, he showed Milton the address. Security? Cameras at the entrances, probably motion sensors. But the building itself is old, converted from a textile factory. Lots of access points if you know what you're looking for. Milton memorized the address. What else? Over the next 2 hours, Dean shared everything. Locations, schedules, patterns of movement. Kevin Becker's law office in downtown Richmond. Dennis Fitch's compound outside Charlottesville. The restaurant where George held weekly meetings with his partners. Mitchell Noble's vacation house where they sometimes brought special clients. Milton absorbed it all, his mind already building a plan. Not a plan for justice. The courts would handle that eventually. This was a plan for something more immediate, more personal. This was a plan for war. By midnight, Ryan still slept on the couch, and Dean had dozed off in an armchair. Milton sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by photographs and documents, and made a list in the small notebook he carried for tracking car parts. Step 1, gather leverage. Step 2, turn them against each other. Step 3, make them destroy themselves. He thought about the families George had shattered, about the children whose faces stared out from surveillance photos. He thought about his son, sleeping peacefully only because of pure chance, because a good cop had been at the right place at the right time. Milton Frank had spent 16 years fixing broken machines. Now he would fix a broken system, one piece at a time. And he would make sure that when George Bishop fell, he fell hard enough that he'd never get up again. Sunday morning arrived with fog thick enough to obscure the cabin's driveway. Milton woke to find Ryan already up, sitting at the window and staring out at the gray woods. Dean was making coffee in the kitchen, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone used to early shifts. "Dad," Ryan said without turning around, "are we in trouble?" Milton joined his son at the window, putting a hand on his shoulder. "No, buddy, but we need to be careful for a while." Because of Grandpa, the intelligence in those 10-year-old eyes startled Milton sometimes. Ryan had Judy's sharp perception, but without the willful blindness that came from privilege. "Yeah, because of Grandpa. Is Mom okay?" That question cut deeper than Milton expected. "I don't know." Dean brought Milton a cup of coffee, and they moved to the kitchen to talk while Ryan remained at the window. "I called in sick today," Dean said. "Bought us some time. But Judy's going to be looking for you. George, too. Let them look." Milton sipped the coffee, bitter and strong. "What do you know about Kevin Becker's practice?" "Small firm, 3 lawyers. Becker handles the family law cases, which gives him access to the CPS system." "Why?" "Because lawyers keep records, and records can be persuasive." Dean's expression shifted to concern. "Milton, if you're thinking about breaking into, I'm thinking about getting proof. The kind that makes them panic. Once they panic, they make mistakes. These men don't panic. They've been doing this for 8 years. They've been comfortable for 8 years, Milton corrected. That's different. Comfortable men make different calculations than scared men. He pulled out his phone and called Judy. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with anger and worry. "Where the hell are you? Dad said you just vanished. We're safe. That's all you need to know." Milton, what is going on? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Did your father tell you what he had planned for Ryan? Silence on the other end. Long enough that Milton knew Dean had been right. Judy had known. Maybe not everything. Maybe just enough to convince herself it was for the best. But she'd known something. You filed for divorce, Milton said quietly. 6 months ago. You lied about abuse. That wasn't. Judy's voice cracked. Dad said you were unstable. He said Ryan would be better off. Better off where, Judy? Better off with George. He loves Ryan. He would never hurt him. Milton closed his eyes, feeling the marriage he'd built for 16 years collapse like a building with flawed foundation. Where are you right now? And my parents. Everyone's worried about you. Dad thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. I bet he does. Tell him I'll be in touch. Milton ended the call before she could respond. Dean had been listening, his expression grim. She's gone, Milton. Whatever you thought you had with her. I know. The words tasted like ash. But she's also the weak point in their operation. George trusted her to help manipulate me, which means she knows things. Maybe not everything, but enough. You're going to use your wife. My ex-wife, apparently. Milton set down his coffee cup with controlled force. And yes, these people used her against me. Now I'm going to return the favor. Over the next hour, Milton outlined his plan to Dean. It was risky, probably illegal in a dozen ways, and absolutely necessary. Dean argued, pushed back, warned of consequences, but Milton could see the cops' resolve weakening. Because Dean had spent 14 months playing by rules that let monsters walk free, and some part of him wanted to see what would happen when someone broke those rules in the right way. I can't help you officially, Dean finally said. If this blows back, it won't blow back on you. You're the one who found me at a safe house after I had a breakdown over the stress of divorce. You're the good cop trying to help a friend through a crisis. That's your story, and you stick to it no matter what. Dean nodded slowly. What do you need? Access to your case files. Everything you've got on George and his network. I need to know their patterns, their properties, their connections. And I need you to keep watching them while I work. If they make any moves toward Ryan or toward me, I need to know immediately. Done. What else? Tools. Specific tools. Milton pulled out his list. Recording equipment, lock picks, a few other items. Nothing you can't get from a spy shop or online. Dean scanned the list. You're going after Becker first. He's the weak link. Lawyers keep everything documented because they think it protects them. His files will give me leverage on the others. His office has security. I know. That's why I'm not going through the front door. By noon, Ryan had been set up with schoolwork at the cabin, and Dean had made arrangements for a friend's wife to check on him every few hours. Milton and Dean drove back toward Richmond, staying off main roads, while Milton memorized the layout of Kevin Becker's office building from the photographs Dean had compiled. The building was a converted brownstone in the historic district, 3 stories, Becker's practice occupying the second floor. Security cameras at the entrances, keycard access after hours, but the building was old enough that it had weak points. The rear entrance served as a fire exit, the alarm system installed in the early 2000s and never upgraded. The office across the hall from Becker's had been vacant for 3 months. The trick, Milton said, studying the photos, is making it look like I was never there. Dean pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks from a building. You're really doing this? Tonight. While Becker's at that fundraiser for Judge Noble. If you get caught. I won't. Milton opened the car door. But if I do, you don't know anything. I'm just a desperate father having a breakdown, remember? Dean grabbed his arm. Milton, these men have killed people who got in their way. The detective who started this investigation, he died in a car accident 6 months before I inherited the case. A social worker who questioned one of George's foster placements committed suicide, supposedly. They're dangerous. Good, Milton said simply. So am I. He spent the afternoon preparing, acquiring the tools he needed from 3 different stores, paying cash, wearing a baseball cap to obscure his face from cameras. A small electronics kit. Lockpicks that he'd learned to use years ago when restoring cars with seized locks. A voice-activated recorder the size of a USB drive. Latex gloves. Dark clothing. By 6 p.m., he was back at the cabin, eating dinner with Ryan and reviewing Dean's files one more time. The boy asked about his mother, and Milton told him the truth. Sometimes people you love make choices you don't understand, and you have to decide whether to forgive them or let them go. Are you going to let Mom go? Ryan asked. I don't know yet, Milton admitted. But you're my priority. You always will be. At 8 p.m., Dean confirmed that Kevin Becker had arrived at the Richmond Country Club for Judge Noble's fundraiser. The event would last at least 3 hours, giving Milton his window. He left Ryan watching a movie and drove into the city in Dean's car, parking 3 blocks from Becker's building. The November night was cold and clear, perfect visibility, but few people on the streets. Milton walked with purpose, but not urgency. Just another professional heading home late. The building's rear entrance was in an alley, lit by a single bulb that flickered periodically. Milton had timed his approach for the flicker. 2 seconds of darkness every 30 seconds. He used one of those intervals to slip into the alley's shadows and examine the door. The alarm was exactly as Dean had described, an older magnetic contact system that could be defeated with a simple bypass. Milton had practiced the technique on his own home security system that afternoon. It took him 90 seconds to create the bypass, holding the circuit closed while he picked the lock, a skill that came back easier than he'd expected. The door opened with a soft click. Milton slipped inside, easing it closed behind him and engaging his bypass to keep the alarm, thinking the door remained shut. The stairwell smelled of old wood and cleaning chemicals. He climbed to the second floor, moving carefully, listening for any sound of security guards or late workers. Becker's office door was simpler than the building entrance, a standard commercial lock that Milton opened in under a minute. He slipped inside, closing the door and allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. City lights from the window provided enough illumination to see the basic layout. Reception area, 2 paralegal desks, and 3 offices beyond. The largest office would be Becker's. He moved through the space like water, disturbing nothing, leaving no trace. Becker's office was exactly what Milton expected. Expensive furniture, diplomas on the wall, and a desk that probably cost more than Milton's car. The computer was locked, but Milton wasn't after digital files. Lawyers like Becker kept paper backups because they didn't trust technology completely. The filing cabinets lined one wall. Milton pulled out his small flashlight, shielding the beam with his hand, and began searching. The files were organized by client name, then by case type. He found what he needed in the 3rd drawer, a section labeled BP Referrals. BP, Bishop Projects, Bishop Partnership. Milton pulled the first file and felt his stomach turn. Inside were complete dossiers on families, surveillance photos, financial records, medical histories, school reports. Handwritten notes in the margins. Father has DUI from 2019. Use this. Mother's sister has custody battle. Leverage point. Child shows signs of defiance. Good candidate. There were dozens of files. Some had completed, stamped across the front. Those were the families George had already destroyed. Others were marked in progress or monitoring. Milton found a file marked Frank, Ryan, and had to steady himself before opening it. Inside was everything. His marriage certificate, Judy's divorce filing, Ryan's school records, Milton's business license, even photographs of their house. Notes from Judy's conversations with her father, transcribed and analyzed. A psychological profile of Milton that painted him as unstable, potentially violent, emotionally abusive. All lies, but lies built so carefully that they'd convinced Judy, at least partially, and lies that would have convinced a judge if George's plan had proceeded. The file also contained something else, a schedule. Intake November 16th, RF. Transport to HC facility pending court order. HC facility. Henrico County. The warehouse Dean had mentioned. Milton photographed every page with his phone, working quickly but thoroughly. Then he moved to the other files, photographing those too. Evidence of 32 cases over 8 years. Families destroyed, children taken, all documented with the cold precision of a business operation. He was finishing the last file when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Milton froze, listening. The steps were slow, measured, security guard making rounds. The footsteps passed Becker's office, continued down the hall, then stopped. A door opened somewhere. the guard checking the vacant office. Milton returned the files to their exact positions and moved toward the window. The office looked out onto a side street, 3 stories up. Not jumpable, but there was a ledge that ran along the building's exterior, wide enough for a narrow walkway if someone was desperate or stupid. The footsteps returned, closer now. A flashlight beam swept under the office door. Milton eased the window open. Thank God it wasn't painted shut, and slipped out onto the ledge. The November air hit him like a slap, cold and sharp. He pulled the window, mostly closed behind him, leaving just enough gap that he could grip it from outside. The office door opened. Flashlight beam swept across the space. Milton pressed himself against the building's brick exterior, controlling his breathing, counting seconds. The ledge was 8 inches wide. Below him, 30 feet of empty air ending in concrete sidewalk. Clear, the guard's voice called. The door closed. Footsteps receded. Milton waited 2 full minutes before easing the window open and climbing back inside. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up. He closed the window, checked that everything was exactly as he'd found it, and slipped out of the office. The return trip was easier. He knew the building's rhythm now, knew the guard's pattern. He was back in the alley within 5 minutes, bypass removed, door locked, no sign he'd ever been there. Dean picked him up 3 blocks away. Well, Milton held up his phone. Everything. Complete files on every family they've targeted. Schedules, locations, financial records. Everything we need. Jesus. Dean stared at the phone like it was a bomb. That's evidence of multiple felonies. If we use this in court, we're not going to court. Not yet. Milton's smile was cold. First, we're going to make them panic. And when they panic, they'll turn on each other. Back at the cabin, Milton downloaded the photos to Dean's laptop and spent the next 3 hours organizing them into a dossier. Names, dates, locations, amounts of money transferred. A complete map of George Bishop's operation, built from his own lawyer's meticulous record-keeping. What now? Dean asked as dawn began to break. Milton looked at the screen, at the faces of children who'd been stolen, families who'd been destroyed. He thought about Ryan sleeping in the next room. Safe for now, but only because of chance. Now, Milton said, I send a message. And then I wait for them to make their first mistake. He composed an email addressed to Kevin Becker's personal account, with copies to Dennis Fitch and Cameron Snell. George Bishop wasn't included. Not yet. The email was simple. I have your files. All of them. Every case, every family, every dollar. You have 48 hours to shut down the operation completely and turn yourselves in to federal authorities. If you don't, these files go to the FBI, the Washington Post, and every news outlet in Virginia. The children you're currently holding will be located and freed. Your choice: prison with the possibility of reduced sentences for cooperation, or life sentences when this goes public and the courts throw everything at you. You should know I'm not interested in negotiating. I'm interested in watching you burn. But I'm giving you one chance to do this the easy way. The clock starts now. He hit send at 6:47 a.m. on Monday morning. By 7:15 a.m., his phone started ringing. It was an unknown number. Milton answered. Kevin Becker's voice was tight, with controlled panic. Who is this? What do you want? I want you to shut down the operation, Milton said calmly. I want the children you're holding released safely. And I want all of you in federal custody within 48 hours. You don't understand what you're interfering with. The people involved. I understand perfectly. I understand you've been stealing children and ruining families for profit. I understand George Bishop has been using his foster care license as a front for trafficking. I understand Judge Noble has been signing illegal custody orders. Should I go on? Silence. Then, if you go to the FBI, you'll be admitting to breaking and entering. The files you stole will be inadmissible. I don't care about admissible. I care about public. When the Washington Post runs this story, when every TV station in Virginia starts investigating, admissibility won't matter. Your lives will be over. Your careers destroyed. Your families ruined. Every parent who ever lost a child to your operation will be screaming for your heads. What do you want? Becker's voice had shifted from panic to negotiation. Money? We can pay. I want justice. 48 hours, Mr. Becker. Use them wisely. Milton ended the call. Dean stared at him. You just declared war. No, Milton said. I just rang the dinner bell. Now we watched them turn on each other. Within 2 hours, the panic had spread through George Bishop's network like fire through dry kindling. Dean monitored their communications through the investigation's legal wiretaps and reported the chaos. Kevin Becker called Dennis Fitch, screaming about security breaches and demanding to know who had talked. Fitch called Cameron Snell, accusing him of getting sloppy with property records. Snell called George Bishop, who'd been in a city council meeting and was now demanding an emergency gathering at his estate. Judge Mitchell Noble had left Richmond entirely, checked into a hotel in D.C. under a fake name. They're fracturing, Dean reported. This is exactly what happens when criminals get scared. They stop trusting each other. Milton watched the surveillance photos Dean showed him. The men arriving at George's estate in separate cars, their body language tense and defensive. Good. Scared men make mistakes. And I need them to make one specific mistake, which is moving the children. Right now, they're at the Henrico facility, but they can't keep them there if they think I'm about to expose the location. They'll have to relocate, which means transport. And transport means vulnerability. Dean's expression shifted to understanding. You want to intercept the transfer. You want to intercept the transfer, Milton corrected. I'm just a concerned citizen who might tip off the FBI about suspicious activity in a known warehouse. This is getting complicated. It's about to get more complicated. Milton made his next call to Judy. She answered immediately, her voice raw from crying. Milton, please. That explained everything. You got this wrong. Did he explain the 32 families he's destroyed? Did he explain the children he's trafficked? That's not. He helps children. He provides foster care for kids in crisis. Judy, I have the files. Complete documentation of every case. I know you helped him with at least 3 of them, including ours. You signed statements. You made calls to CPS based on lies he fed you. The silence stretched long enough that Milton thought she'd hung up. Then, I thought I was helping. He said you were becoming unstable, that Ryan would be better off. Better off where? Tell me where Dad was planning to send Ryan. To a school. A special school for gifted children in Europe. Dad has connections, programs that help talented kids reach their potential. Milton's laugh was bitter. There is no school, Judy. There's a pipeline that sells children to whoever's buying. Some for labor, some for adoption rings, some for worse. Your father isn't a philanthropist. He's a trafficker. You're lying. Then ask him. Ask him what HC facility means. Ask him about Dennis Fitch's transport schedule. Ask him why Kevin Becker has files on 32 families with children who all mysteriously disappeared in a foster care that led nowhere. I need to think. You need to decide, Milton said coldly. In 48 hours, everything goes public. You can be part of the investigation as a witness who was manipulated, or you can go down with them as an accomplice. Those are your only choices. He ended the call and immediately dialed George Bishop's personal cell phone. The old man answered after one ring. Milton. George's voice was controlled, but Milton could hear the rage underneath. We need to talk. Talk fast. Your time is running out. Whatever you think you know, I know everything. I have Becker's files. Complete documentation of your entire operation. Names, dates, financial transfers, locations of properties. I know about Judge Noble's orders. I know about the HC facility. I know about the 32 children you've stolen. George's breathing was audible over the line. You've made a serious mistake. Have I? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one facing federal trafficking charges, conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and probably murder if they investigate that detective's car accident thoroughly enough. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This operation has protection at levels you can't imagine. Then let them protect you. You have 48 hours before everything goes public. Use that time however you want, but know this, I'm not negotiating. I'm not accepting bribes. I'm not backing down. You threatened my son. You destroyed dozens of families. Now you're going to pay for it. Milton, one more thing, George. Judy's talking to the FBI tomorrow morning. She's going to tell them everything she knows about your operation, including her own involvement. She's going to testify against you in exchange for immunity. I suggest you prepare for that. The lie came easily because Milton knew it would accomplish exactly what he needed. George would see his own daughter as a traitor, and his paranoia would complete the fracture that had already begun. Milton ended the call and looked at Dean. How long before they move the children? Based on their pattern of behavior? Tonight. They'll want them relocated before your deadline hits. Can you track the transport? My team's been monitoring the facility for 6 months. We've got eyes on every entrance. If they move anyone, we'll know. Then tonight we move too. Dean nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone and made a call. Sergeant, it's Peck. I need to brief you on a development in the Bishop case. We might have an opportunity for intervention tonight. Yes, sir. Full tactical team. Understood. He hung up and looked at Milton. This is it. Once we move on that facility, the investigation goes active. Everything becomes official. You'll be questioned about how you obtained the information. Let them question me. As long as those kids get out safe, I don't care what happens to me. Dean studied his friend for a long moment. You're a good father, Milton. Ryan's lucky to have you. Ryan's the only thing that matters. As the sun set on Monday evening, Milton Frank sat in Dean Peck's car 3 blocks from the Henrico County warehouse and watched the shadows lengthen. Behind them, tactical teams were moving into position, coordinated through Dean's sergeant and the FBI agents who joined the operation once Dean briefed them on the evidence. Milton had provided everything: photos of the files, documentation of the timeline, evidence of the conspiracy. He'd admitted to breaking into Becker's office, accepted that he'd faced charges for that, and didn't care. Because in 2 hours, children who'd been stolen from their families would go home, and the men who'd taken them would finally face consequences. At 8:47 p.m., the warehouse's loading dock opened. 2 vans pulled out, driving slowly, cautiously. Dean radioed the information to his sergeant, and the trap began to close. Vehicles are heading east on Route 60, Dean reported. FBI's got aerial surveillance tracking them. Tactical teams are ready to move on your signal. Milton watched through binoculars as the vans turned onto the main road. He couldn't see the children inside, but he knew they were there. Scared, confused, not understanding why they'd been taken from their families. Sir, a voice crackled over Dean's radio. We have visual confirmation of minors in both vehicles. Ages range from approximately 6 to 13. Count is, Jesus Christ, there's at least 20 kids in there. 20 children. Not just Ryan's potential future, but children who'd already been stolen, already processed through George Bishop's machine. All units move in, the sergeant's voice commanded. Intercept and secure the vehicles. FBI, you're cleared for arrests. Let's bring these kids home. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. The vans were boxed in by unmarked police vehicles at a controlled intersection. Tactical teams swarmed both vans, securing the drivers. Dennis Fitch in one vehicle, one of his associates in the other. The children were carefully removed, frightened but unharmed, and immediately placed with emergency services and family counselors. Milton watched from 3 blocks away as ambulances arrived, as FBI agents and windbreakers began processing the scene, as television news crews descended on what would become the biggest story Richmond had seen in decades. Dean's phone rang. It was his sergeant. Peck, we've got Fitch and his driver in custody. They're already trying to deal, pointing fingers at everyone else. Judge Noble was picked up in D.C. an hour ago. Apparently, he tried to flee to Canada. Cameron Snell's been arrested at his office. Kevin Becker. Dean listened, his expression darkening. Understood. He ended the call and looked at Milton. Becker's dead. Apparent suicide in his office about an hour ago. Left a note confessing to everything and naming George Bishop as the operations architect. Milton felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. And George, he's at his estate. FBI's on the way with arrest warrants. It's over, Milton. The operation's done. But Milton knew it wasn't quite over. Not yet. The FBI arrested George Bishop at 10:23 p.m. in his study, the same room where Milton had seen the custody papers just 3 days earlier. The old man went quietly, dignified even in defeat, but his eyes held the same calculation they always had. He was already planning his defense, already figuring angles. Milton didn't go home that night. He stayed at the cabin with Ryan, watching news reports of the massive bust, the rescue of 20 children, the arrest of prominent Richmond citizens on federal trafficking charges. The story spread across Virginia, then nationally. By Tuesday morning, the Washington Post had it on the front page: elaborate child trafficking ring exposed in Virginia. Judy called at dawn. Milton debated not answering, but ultimately pressed accept. "I didn't know," she said immediately, voice broken. "I swear to God, Milton, I didn't know what he was really doing. The divorce filing. He convinced me you were becoming dangerous. He showed me reports, doctors' evaluations that were supposedly about you. All fake," Milton said. "All part of the manipulation. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Milton wanted to hate her. Part of him did hate her for being so willingly blind, for choosing her father's lies over 16 years of marriage. But another part recognized that she'd been a victim too, just a different kind. "What do you want, Judy?" "I want to see Ryan. I want to explain. Ryan's safe. That's all that matters right now. Milton, please. He's my son too." "Is he? Because 3 days ago you were ready to let George take him. I thought it was for the best. I thought Dad was protecting him." "You thought wrong, and now you have to live with that." Silence stretched between them. 16 years of marriage collapsing into this single moment of truth. Finally, Judy spoke again, quieter. "The FBI wants to talk to me. They said I could face charges for filing the false divorce petition. Tell them everything you know. Cooperate completely. It's your only chance. Will you ever forgive me?" Milton looked at Ryan, who was sleeping peacefully on the couch, safe and whole. "I don't know, but right now, I need to focus on protecting our son. Everything else is secondary." He ended the call. Over the next week, the investigation expanded like ripples in water. Judge Mitchell Noble cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealing a network that extended beyond Virginia into 3 other states. Federal authorities identified 17 more properties used in the trafficking operation. More arrests followed. Lawyers, social workers, even 2 other judges who'd been on George Bishop's payroll. Most importantly, 14 of the 32 children who'd been taken were located and returned to their families. The others remained missing, but the FBI had opened active investigations into their whereabouts, using the documentation from Becker's files to track the pipeline. George Bishop sat in federal detention, refusing to cooperate, confident his lawyers could mount a defense. Milton knew the old man was still calculating, still believing his wealth and connections would save him. That's when Milton made his final move. He contacted the Washington Post reporter who'd been covering the story, a woman named Gabriella McIntosh who'd built her career on exposing corruption. Milton provided her with something the FBI hadn't released yet: complete copies of Becker's files, including the detailed notes about how they'd selected families, how they'd manufactured crises, how they destroyed lives methodically and deliberately. The story ran on Sunday, a week after the arrests. Inside the machine, how Richmond's elite built a child trafficking empire. It included interviews with families who'd been targeted, photographs of documents showing the calculated cruelty, and most damning of all, excerpt from George Bishop's own handwritten notes about children being inventory and families being marks. Public outrage exploded. Protests erupted outside the courthouse where George was being held. Families who'd lost children 20 years earlier began coming forward, demanding investigations into cases they'd never thought would be solved. The governor called for a complete review of Virginia's foster care system. George Bishop's defense team abandoned him within 48 hours of the Post story, unwilling to represent someone so publicly reviled. His assets were frozen, his properties seized, his reputation destroyed so completely that even his country club revoked his membership. Milton watched it all from a distance, taking care of Ryan, rebuilding the small life that had been nearly destroyed. Dean stopped by the cabin regularly, updating him on the investigation's progress and the growing case against George and his remaining co-conspirators. The federal prosecutor says it's one of the strongest cases they've ever had. Dean reported 2 weeks after the arrests. Between Becker's files, Noble's testimony, and the evidence from the warehouses, they've got them on trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and about 15 other charges. George is looking at life without parole. Good, Milton said simply. There's one complication. The prosecutor wants to know how you obtained Becker's files. You're going to have to testify about the break-in. I'm ready for that. And he was. When the trial began 3 months later, Milton Frank took the stand and admitted under oath that he'd broken into Kevin Becker's office, picked the locks, and photographed files without permission or legal authority. He explained why. Because his son had been targeted, because the legal system was too slow, because children were in immediate danger. The defense attorney tried to make him look like a vigilante, a criminal who'd broken the law and poisoned the entire investigation. But the prosecutor was ready. Mr. Frank, she said calmly, if you hadn't obtained those files, would these children have been rescued? No. Would Mr. Fitch's transport operation have been intercepted? No. Would any of these defendants be facing justice today? Probably not. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found George Bishop guilty on all counts. Dennis Fitch got life without parole. Cameron Snell got 30 years. Mitchell Noble, who'd cooperated extensively, got 15 years. Judy Bishop testified against her father in exchange for immunity. She divorced Milton formally, given him full custody of Ryan, and moved to North Carolina to start over somewhere people didn't know her name. As for Milton, he faced 1 count of breaking and entering. The judge, after hearing the full story and considering the 20 children who'd been saved, gave him 6 months of probation and a small fine. The courtroom erupted in applause from the families of rescued children, from advocates who'd been fighting the foster care system for years, from ordinary citizens who saw him as a hero. Milton didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father who'd protected his son and helped other children in the process. Nothing more, nothing less. 18 months after the arrests, Milton Frank stood in his garage, putting the finishing touches on the 1967 Mustang he'd started before everything fell apart. Ryan sat on a stool nearby, doing homework but occasionally looking up to watch his father work. The car was beautiful, paint like liquid midnight, chrome shining like mirrors, engine purring like a satisfied cat. Milton had poured all his focus into it over the past year, letting the mechanical problems cleanse his mind of the human ones. Dean Peck walked into the garage, carrying 2 beers. He handed one to Milton and gestured at the Mustang. That's a work of art. Thanks. Buyer's picking it up tomorrow. Already sold it for twice what I expected. Business good. Better than ever. Turns out being that guy who took down the trafficking ring is excellent advertising. Milton's smile was wry. Dean laughed, then grew serious. I wanted you to hear it from me first. George Bishop died in prison this morning. Heart attack. Milton absorbed this information, waiting for some feeling to emerge. Relief? Satisfaction? But there was only a calm neutrality. How old was he? 65. The stress probably didn't help. He'd been fighting every appeal, refusing to accept it was over. It's over, Milton agreed. They drank their beers in companionable silence. Ryan finished his homework and came over to examine the Mustang more closely, asking questions about the engine specifications that showed he'd inherited his father's mechanical aptitude. Dad, Ryan said eventually, when I'm older, can I help you restore cars? Milton looked at his son, 13 now, growing tall and confident, no longer the frightened 10-year-old who'd been nearly stolen. Yeah, buddy, I'd like that. After Dean left and Ryan went inside to play video games, Milton stayed in the garage, looking at the Mustang. He thought about the past 18 months, about the families who'd been reunited, about the children who'd been saved. He thought about the ones still missing and the FBI agents still working those cases. He thought about Judy, who called occasionally talked to Ryan, but never asked about Milton. He thought about George Bishop, who died believing he could beat the system he'd corrupted. And he thought about the choice he'd made, to break the law in service of a greater justice, to risk everything to protect his son and others like him. Some people would say he'd been a vigilante. Others would call him a hero. Milton knew he was neither. He was just a father who'd refused to let monsters win. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Frank, you don't know me, but you saved my daughter. She was one of the children rescued from a warehouse. I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, she's home. Because of you, she's safe. I will never be able to repay you, but I will spend every day being grateful that someone like you exists in this world." Milton read the message twice, then saved it in a folder with 17 others like it. Messages from parents whose children have been saved, whose lives have been restored, whose nightmares had ended because he'd been willing to fight. He looked at the Mustang one more time, this beautiful machine he'd brought back from broken to pristine through patience and skill. Then he closed the garage door and went inside, where Ryan was waiting to show him something on his computer. The past was done. The monsters had fallen. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. And Milton Frank was home with his son, which was all that had ever mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.